Alrighty, we're live, everybody. It's Friday. It's the CUI hotline. It's the weekly Q&A. It is, hopefully, we'll get more breaking news in the middle of this stream, and you can watch my heart rate rocket through the roof like we did at the end of last week. Scott's here, which is always awesome. Hard to pin you down these days, Scott, because you're always traveling around helping to save the world. But we were able to get Scott on the stream. I think we're going to post the clip of the end of last week's hotline sometime where you can actually see the gears in my brain stop in real time.
That was so great. That was so great.
It was pretty fun. Okay, we're streaming on LinkedIn. We're streaming on YouTube. So feel free to leave your questions and your comments and your adulation and your praise in the chat, or your disagreements. You can go to cuihotline.org. You fill out the form. You can leave a message at the hotline over there, and then we can go through it. We got a bunch of stuff in the queue. We got a bunch of stuff to talk about. But Scott, first and foremost, we haven't heard from you in a while. You were going to talk about Space Command news, Golden Dome news. Yeah. These are some pretty heavy-duty topics.
Yeah, there's been a lot going on. Unfortunately, I'm not able to be here every week. Just due to travel and everything else that's going on, both in work and in life. But love when I'm able to make it work out to be here on a Friday. So thanks for having me in. Big news this week on the Space Command front with Space Command headquarters getting relocated to Huntsville. That's big news for the North Alabama DIB ecosystem, which we have a lot of customers obviously in this area that are going to be working on various components of both the relocation as well as, contracts and such going forward. So big news. That was something that has been kind of a political hot potato for the last few years after it was initially in the first Trump administration, Huntsville was selected for Space Command. And then through a second process, it was selected again during the Biden administration, but was then, lots of politics back and forth, went to Colorado, and now President Trump has moved it back to Huntsville, and they're about to start building buildings here. So, big news for the Huntsville, North Alabama Defense Industrial Base, and with that comes along the contracts with Golden Dome, right? So Golden Dome is going to be a huge implementation of integration of existing air defense systems and those kinds of things. And with the addition of some new services or some new capabilities that are going to be developed for Golden Dome to essentially, build up our air defense systems across the entire United States and to some degree Canada as well. And with that, there has been a memo floating around out there, from DoD. I don't think it's been made fully public or posted on the website yet, but if you look hard enough out there, you can find it, and it lists out the cybersecurity requirements for all the contracts on Golden Dome. And so this kind of ties both the Space Command as well as the Golden Dome, contracts that are expected. And those requirements are pretty significant requirements. Lots of talk in there about CMMC level 3. In fact, we've gotten reach outs from, about a half dozen customers that obviously are going to be looking at Golden Dome as a looking at Golden Dome targets for contracts, and they're starting to ask about L3 and how they can get to CMMC level 3 to meet some of the requirements on these contracts. And it goes well beyond that. The supply chain requirements in that memo were very significant, along with the bill of materials. And I don't know if everybody's familiar with SBOMs and those kinds of things, but software bill of materials, hardware bill of materials, firmware, chemical, raw materials. I mean, this memo really went to the mat on the bill of materials.
Yeah.
Which I think is going to absolutely throw a lot of contractors for a big loop. It is a significant, it's going to be a significant requirement to provide a full bill of materials for all of those, components, when you're building out, components for Golden Dome. So something definitely to have on your radar if you are considering pursuing contracts around Golden Dome. The cybersecurity requirements are going to be well north of just a base CMMC L2 certification.
Yeah, this is something, I remember bringing up all all the way back in the Senate Armed Services Committee report that went with the FY20 NDAA language that was the reason why CMMC was created. They talked about the language was a framework for holding contractors accountable for cybersecurity requirements is a first step in securing the supply chain. So CMMC has never been the end of the road in the perspective of the department or the Armed Services Committee by any means. So I think that the stuff that's in that memo and is going to come out about Golden Dome requirements is just more evidence of that for sure.
I mean, with that exploration, I've talked to 3 very large defense contractors, and they're like, yeah, we would love to do Golden Dome. I was like, well, have you seen CMMC level 3 requirements on your OT manufacturing space? So anybody out there listening to the sound of our collective voices, read the scoping guidance for specialized assets. They've got to meet L2 and L3 requirements. You can basically have a front device that's kind of receiving those requirements for the things behind it, think like a firewall. But I mean, we're talking potentially CMMC might cost you $300,000, $500,000, $1 million, right? This is probably, I mean,
careful,
4x.
Careful,
that.
you're gonna step right into a landmine with Jacob with that phrasing, right? NIST 800-171,
right.
And NIST 800-171 is going to cost you that. CMMC is just the assessment cost.
Here we go.
Careful,
You're like,
careful.
Appliances and security, CMMC cost this much. You guys want to watch the vein pop out of my forehead?
But you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, what you said, Daniel, is absolutely correct. If you go into the rule, into the 32 CFR rule, they did the estimate of the cost for CMMC L3, right?
Mm-hmm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob. You've read that rule probably more times than I have. If I remember correctly, the number that they had in the rule, I believe, was 2.7 million.
That sounds right. I can look it up here in a minute. But yeah, that sounds it's a lot. And they've never shied away from how much either level 3 now or level 5 back in CMMC 1.0 days. They were like, yeah, this is a problem in the millions of dollars.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so that's you know, that's obviously very significant. And if they're going to broadly put that in play for all the Golden Dome contracts, and Golden Dome isn't the only contract that's like that out there that's going to be using really high end technologies. There's those kinds of things are all over the Air Force and the Navy. I would say to a little bit lesser degree probably the Army. But Army and Navy, or Navy and Air Force and Space Command, they have that kind of stuff all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. In other recent news, on the DIBCAC website, if you'd like to reach out to schedule your CMMC Level 3, they're currently asking for people to email them. So if you want to work on GDA, and if you think what's in the memo is a good hint at what's coming around the corner, then you can get the ball rolling if you really want to. So there you go. That's encouraging.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. When do you know when that came out? I didn't realize.
I don't know when it went up specifically. It's been relatively recently, but it's up there now. So feel free to email our friends at DIBCAC and get started on your level 3. We have quite a few people who've gone through their level 2 who are probably going to be interested in getting started on that early next year. So there you go. All righty, Daniel, let's talk about enduring exceptions.
Okay, so I had the privilege of talking to our own internal lead assessor, Lighty. And we were talking about the nuances of like very bizarre systems, right? So not maybe full on specialized asset, maybe not full on like OT per se. But we were talking about it. And he's like, have you ever heard this thing called enduring exceptions? I was like, no one has ever talked about this before. And it's in 32 CFR. It's in NIST 800-171 assessment method. Like it's in multiple different publications. But basically what it says, and I'll read it out because it's a little bit small. Let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit. Enduring exception means a special circumstance or system where remediation and full compliance with CMMC security requirements is not feasible. Examples include systems required to replicate the configuration of fielded systems, medical devices, test equipment, OT, IoT. No operational plan of action is required, but the circumstance must be documented within a system security plan. Specialized assets in GFE may be enduring exceptions. It's a CMMC custom term. And it kind of reiterates that down below in the CMMC L2 scoping guidance. And so we were talking about this because we had a client that had to maintain vulnerable machines for the sake of the cyber research they were doing. Like they couldn't actually put all 110 because it would break the research they were doing that was a requirement of the contract that they were on. but they weren't government pieces of equipment. They were this company's own devices that they were doing vulnerability testing on. And so when they were going through this and we were going through the scoping guidance, it's like, man, like you put them as a specialized asset that doesn't seem to really fit. I mean, they're still kind of a more traditional corporate type asset in the sense of like the build and the OS and things like that. And then Caleb pulled this up. He's got a great LinkedIn post about it. I'll drop it here in chat in just a second. And basically, like you can have these one-off exceptions via CMMC about why you cannot apply all of the controls for the sake of that system doing its job. So kind of a blend of almost specialized asset, but not quite. It doesn't prescribe that you have to associate this with a specialized asset. You could associate with a CUI asset potentially. This is not a get out of jail free card, so you can't just use this thing left and right. But for very unique circumstances where maybe the asset types don't fit and you can't overlay all 110 controls. So think like really large HPCs, potentially quantum computers, right? Like more emerging technologies that maybe Rev 2 wasn't fully built for. It's just kind of an interesting takeaway. So anyways, store that in the back of your brain. I'll drop Caleb's post here in chat, but that it could be a good use case for some very unique situations for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. When it comes to the level 3 cost assessment, Scott, from the final rule, like the DoD says, if you're pursuing level 3 compliance includes implementation of 800-172 requirements not required in prior rules. So the implementation of the requirements assessed by level 1 and the requirements assessed by level 2 are imposed by prior rules all the way back from 2016, even earlier, depending on how far back you want to go. They say, therefore, the non-recurring and recurring engineering cost estimates have been included in the cost estimate for CMMC level 3. And they say non-recurring engineering upfront 21.1 million, recurring engineering 4.1 million. So you could
that's for the other than small. What does it say for small entities?
Let's see. For smalls down here, it would be 2.7 and somewhere close to 490. So it's very, it's somewhere between 500,000 and $20 million. Is the window of uncertainty here. So all righty. Okay, so speaking about costs, all right, everybody, gather around. We're going through the greatest hits that we went through. It seems like every year for the last 5 years or so. I'm going to be as concise as I possibly can. If CMMC didn't exist, if the cost of CMMC assessment were completely subsidized and you needed to spend $0 to get an assessment, you would still have costs to implement the requirements in NIST SP 800-171 and comply with the requirements pursuant to DFARS Clause 252, 204, 7012. Having free CMMC assessments doesn't suddenly make it so that you don't have implementation costs, because CMMC is not the thing that's making you implement the requirements in DFARS 7012. The requirements in DFARS 7012 are required by DFARS 7012. I see this a lot. I've been seeing this a lot recently, where people are saying CMMC is going to cost $100,000, $200,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, we have almost 50 clients that have gone through assessment. There are almost 300 companies that have their level 2 certification assessment, and none of the companies that we have worked with directly or heard about have spent anywhere near $100,000 for the cost of their assessment, right? Now, they may have spent that much to fully implement their requirements in order to be assessed, but it is not correct to say that the cost of CMMC is the cost of DFARS 7012. Never has been true, never will be true. It makes it more difficult to explain what CMMC is when people conflate these two ideas. People who are new to the space, or they're just sort of catching up with what's going on with the regulations, totally understandable how you could be led to that conclusion, because the talk about CMMC completely overshadows the pre-existing nature of DFARS 7012.
So maybe we should get even more specific in this conversation, this talk track, Jacob, because we've been giving this talk track for a long time, just to make sure that it's really clear, where the requirements are coming from and what costs should be associated to what set of requirements. But as we just kind of talked about with CMMC level 3, the cost of implementation for CMMC level 3 is actually being implemented by the CMMC rule, right? So maybe we should be more specific and say CMMC level 2 is not going to cost you this, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's that's definitely a good point. And we can find this language directly in the final rule. They're very clear about it. They were clear about it in the proposed rule. They were clear about it in the 2020 CMMC rule. And they say that the CMMC costs for level 1 and 2 are estimates based only upon self-assessment, certification assessment, and affirmation activities that you have to undergo in order to allow DoD to verify implementation of the relevant underlying security requirements. DoD did not consider the cost of implementing the security requirements themselves because implementation is already required by existing clauses. As such, the non-recurring engineering costs to implement the security requirements, blah, 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 are not included in this economic analysis, right? So saying, oh, CMMC is going to cost me this much because you got a quote for implementation for $100,000 is not true. CMMC is going to cost you whatever the price of your assessment is going to cost you. DFARS 7012 is going to cost you whatever the cost of implementation is. So a lot of people go, well, we should get funding for CMMC. We should get offsets for CMMC. We should get tax credits for CMMC. I don't disagree. I would love it if the government backed up the Brinks trucks and gave everybody all the money that they needed. I'm just letting you know that if you ask for an offset for CMMC, it is a fraction of what the actual cost is that you're talking about. What you should be asking for is for offsets to help with DFARS 7012 because that's where the majority of the costs stem from. So it seems like we're splitting hairs. And the regulation guy is like, actually, there's 2 different rules with 2 different cost estimates. I'm trying to help you. If you're asking for money, ask for money for the biggest cost, not the smallest cost. There you go. PSA over.
That was beautiful. I mean, because CMMC assessments, we've seen them range on average, very low end, very small boundary, about 30K, all the way up to close to about 80K. That's a usually fair range depending on the scope and size of the organization. CMMC implementation, Scott, you've said this for years, 6-figure problem. It's so hard to not have it be a 6-figure problem, even for really small businesses.
Yeah, I mean, there was a comment that was just made by a LinkedIn user, breaking down the cost drivers for 7012 versus L2. And yes, we actually have done sessions on that. I did a session. I'm looking over the comment now. I did a session last year at Secure the Dib. I did a session specifically on budgeting for security and compliance as a whole, and I included in that the breakdown for DFARS 7012 based on company size and all of that. I did a little bit of a rehash of that to this year at Secure the Dib. And so you can go out and find both recordings for both sessions, and I would recommend you do that. The session I did last year at Secure the Dib and the session I did this year at Secure the Dib. There's a link right there for budgeting. All of that content, we've kind of created over the last few years to give you some general ideas on what should be expected. So that is absolutely content that is very important to help everybody as they're looking at how to do the implementation and budget for it.
Absolutely. Great info. All right, everybody. Let's see here. I don't know. How about this one? Scott, is Summit 7 a CSP or an MSP? Well, the nature of what we do with our clients, would we be considered a managed provider? Are we a cloud service provider?
Yeah.
How does that work exactly?
So Summit 7 is an MSP. So when DoD put the rule out, they put everything under the bucket of an ESP, okay, an external service provider. Within the bucket of external service provider, there is a subset called a CSP and a subset called MSP and MSSP. All right. So CSPs are cloud service providers that are essentially hosting controlled unclassified information in their environment for you to collaborate on within their ecosystem. It is where it is where the data is being held. An MSP is a managed service provider where we're essentially helping you implement operate, and maintain your own infrastructure. Now, so for example, Microsoft is a CSP because you are leveraging Azure, you're leveraging Office 365, GCC High. That is a cloud service provider. Summit 7 is an MSP, and MSPs help you operate that Microsoft ecosystem that you own. Okay. So CSPs have to be FedRamped because any cloud service that is hosting controlled and classified information has to be FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP moderate equivalent under the current DFARS 7012 rule. Because us as an MSP, we do not host your data. We are not a CUI asset and holding it in the cloud. We do not have to be FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP moderate equivalent. Based on the rule, we don't even actually have to be CMMC L2 certified. Right now, in the initial proposed rule, there was a certification requirement for MSPs. In the final rule, there was not an actual certification requirement for MSPs and MSSPs. So that changed. So that's the difference. Is where where is the data sitting? Where is your CUI? Is it a cloud service or is it a managed service? And there are differences.
Yeah, it isn't just that we're performing the administrative functions inside of our clients' environments, right? Depending on the back end architecture that they're selling you, it can definitely make that not as black and white as it is sort of with what we do, right?
And there are companies out there, and I'll shout out one, Beryllium QuickTrack, right? Yep. So Beryllium QuickTrack, they act as a CSP and they act as an MSP/MSSP. So they're doing all of it because they have built an infrastructure and they are selling you a portion of that infrastructure and you're putting your data into that shared infrastructure. And so in that circumstance, they're acting as a CSP. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then they're also acting as the MSP to manage the environment for you. So they're doing both. We, Summit 7, we don't do the hosting of the data. Right. If we set up a service and we were, doing that thing, then we would have to be a CSP with FedRAMP. And Beryllium has gone and done the FedRAMP moderate equivalency. Yep. There are others out there. Prevail is another one. They have done the FedRAMP moderate equivalency. So it's just a difference in how you're servicing the ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So if you're out there and you're shopping around and you're vetting people, it's definitely a question to ask because it might not be immediately apparent when you look at marketing material what back-end architecture decisions have been made because a lot of it all looks the same from the consumer's perspective. So just realize that there's some extra information you got to dig into, but feel free to reach out because we've helped people answer this question quite a bit. Speaking of reaching out, Scott, there's a lot of excitement going on in the ecosystem. We are now what is this? 9 months post the effective date of the 32 CFR rule. Almost 300 companies have their level 2 assessments. 48 CFR rule has cleared regulatory review. We're waiting on that to get published in the Federal Register whenever they get around to it. What's the current lead time look like? If somebody calls us up and they go, "Oh my God, my customer is like, we got to go right now." What's that look like for folks?
Yeah. So Daniel, you may actually have more updated information on this than I do because you're having these conversations on a daily basis.
I was about to say, PMO and I are best friends.
Yeah.
So our project management office, shout out to Ashley Narcisse, doing a great job out there. So right now, kind of post-procurement, meaning we've purchased the software needed to provision the tenant and all of that. We're looking in between about 3 to 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, somewhere in that ballpark to kick off an engagement. Yeah. Now, the duration of that engagement could be as short as 2, 3, 4 months, could be longer. Again, just kind of depending on all the organizational change and technical debt we're going to dig out of and get you certified. So
there you go. All righty. Okay, somebody had this scenario question. They said our managed service provider is a C3 PAO, but they are not CMMC level 2 certified themselves. Scott, is what you just talked about. The proposed 32 CFR rule said MSPs do need to have a level 2 certification, and they backed off of that. And the actual CMMC policy that went into effect in December does not require managed service providers to be level 2. Here in this situation, their MSP is a C3 PAO. I hope that means that they're not getting their assessment from their MSP. A big no-no. How should people think about this?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I'm not sure who that is, and I'm not going to ask for names, but I know a lot of them out there, and I'm not familiar with this specific situation. That being said, just because an MSP is a C3PAO does not, and being a C3PAO, you have to go through, an assessment, right? You have to be CMMC L2 certified to, or have had DIBCAT come in and do the assessment against NIST 80171. So they have been through an assessment at some level. That being said, they could have done that assessment on an enclave that they're only using for the C3PAO services and not using that same environment to service their MSP clients.
Right.
So what's really critical is if they don't have to have, your MSP by the rule does not have to have a CMMC L2 certification. Okay. But if they don't, you need to be asking for a shared responsibility matrix that shows exactly how they are meeting and what your requirements are to meet all of the controls, all the assessment objectives. I would find it very unusual if there was an MSP that was also a C3PAO, but had not gone through the process to have their delivery platform certified to the same level as their C3PAO platform. Yeah. That would be a red flag for me. Certainly something I'd be asking questions about. That doesn't mean that they're completely wrong. It could happen. Yeah. And still meet the requirements, but it's certainly something I would ask a lot of questions about.
Yeah. And just to be clear, Summit 7, we are not a C3PAO. We are not in the business of paying or having people pay us money to conduct their level 2 assessment. We're strictly a service provider. So yeah, we are not a C3PAO. We have 2 CMMC certifications. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So we did one on our corporate infrastructure. For example, if we were going to pursue a government contract, we do have a government contract. And so, we have that certification. And then we have a second certification that is specifically on our managed services provider, our MSP delivery platform. And it has been certified to CMMC L2 with the SRM and everything that goes with that. So Jason brought up a good point. C3PAOs don't necessarily undergo actual CMMC L2 certifications, but they do get certified to 80171 by DIBCAT.
Yeah. And so my understanding is the reasoning behind that is because, the DoD is infamous for saying this thing where it's like you need to treat assessment information as if it were CUI, but it is not technically its own category of CUI. So DoD's policy is if you're going to be a C3PAO for us, we're going to make you go through and prove that you've implemented these requirements because you're handling information and generating information that we feel is tantamount to CUI. So I think it's the proper move for DoD, even though that CUI authority isn't there. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All righty. Let's see here. Somebody put this in the comments of the podcast that you and I did this week, Daniel, and they said the reason rulemaking has taken so long is because there is no funding for CMMC and the program won't scale. I would like to inform this person that is not the reason why rulemaking has taken so long. In fact, rulemaking for CMMC has not taken so long. It has gone faster than average for DoD rulemaking, both for 32 CFR and for 48 CFR. There are a lot of reasons why rulemaking takes a long time. Part of it is the way that the rulemaking system has what they call calcified over the years. There's a lot of executive orders and laws and rules that govern the rulemaking process. And that just means that it takes a long time. As we've talked about in our rulemaking webinar in January and other events prior to that, you end up with like a rule that's 600 pages long when the actual text of the regulation is like a couple dozen pages, because that preamble to the rule is like this estimate and this analysis and this mandatory summary. And these people had to check it and these other people had to cross-check it. And then you throw that into the system. And pretty soon, if you get it done in 12 months, you're flying through the system. So the reason that rulemaking has taken so long is not because there's no funding or because CMMC, according to this person, won't scale. That's not true. So thanks for the comments and for watching the video, but that's not why rulemaking has taken so long.
I mean, we have to pause after the session that we had last week about 48 CFR. Oh my God, final. Can we just introduce like a little bit of what's going on right now? Like where is 48 CFR? Is it real? Is it official? Is it kind of official?
Yeah. So basically the way that the standard rulemaking process works is the government agency, in this case the DoD, is going to publish a proposed rule. They're going to take public comments on that rule. The public comment window will close. They're going to adjudicate those public comments. Then there's a bunch of internal red tape that has to happen. Then they submit that final rule and all their comment responses up to an office inside of the Office of Management and Budget called the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, called OIRA. They go through a 90 to 120 day review process. Then it goes back for more signatures and red tape. Then it goes to the Office of the Federal Register, who does their own checks and their own review and their own double checking of the bibliography. And then it gets published as a final rule. Once it gets published as a final rule, there may or may not be a window of delay until it takes effect, typically anywhere from 1 to 60 days. On Friday, we found out that OIRA had concluded its regulatory review of the 48 CFR final rule, which means that it is now in that limbo period of red tape and final signatures and sign-offs and things like that before it goes over to the Office of the Federal Register for publication. That process usually takes 1 to 3 weeks. It's been a week, so it could be literally any moment. It could be while we're live right now. But that's what's going on with 48 CFR. Once it's published and we find out the effective date, we'll know the day that CMMC Phase 1 will begin, because CMMC Phase 1 begins on the effective date of the 48 CFR final rule.
Right now, I feel like we're kind of trending towards like a Thanksgiving CMMC effective date go live present. Would you say
when we saw the rule go from DoD to OIRA in July, the most conservative, largest estimate window that we have was anywhere from October to February, based off of how long this process normally takes historically, based on our analysis of DoD rulemaking back to 2009. Like I said, OIRA typically has 90 days. They can request up to 120 days to do the review. In this situation, OIRA took 45 days. They took half the time that they're allowed to review the rule, and they just said, you're good. So I don't think it's going to be February. It could easily be literally any day that we see it published. And then the real question is when it goes into effect. So if it gets published next week and it goes into effect 60 days later, you're talking November. If it gets published at the end of the month and it goes into effect 15 days later, you're talking mid-October. If it gets published on Monday and it goes into effect immediately, you're talking Monday. So we just don't know at this point, but we're basically past the last milestone.
It would be fantastically ironic if they put a hard effective date of October 1 on it.
God, that would be amazing.
I will never be able to explain my way out, and it will be.
Oh, that would be so hilarious.
Oh, man. All righty. All right, Daniel. We heard this on multiple calls just this week. We may or may not have heard this on a call just this morning from a large defense contractor who's currently has defense contracts and has had defense contracts for a long time. And the question was, if we're a subcontractor and we have the data and requirements flowed to us, and then we flow that data to our subcontractors, you're telling me I have to flow those requirements to them as well?
Yes, I am.
That's what the rule says.
And not only that, you should have been doing, and Jacob, you and I talk about this all the time. Scott, you and I talk about this all the time. You should have been doing it the whole time. DFARS 7012 also has contractual flow down requirements. So like what we kind of wonder in a lot of cases is like, what have people been doing until CMMC? Like supply chain risk managers out there, like, have we actually been doing enough due diligence for flowing down and validating that we're only working with those organizations truly accepting and meeting the 7012 requirements? So what you see here on the screen is from 32 CFR and the language around flow down. So CMMC level 3, very top, you can either be level 3 or they allow for CMMC L2 certification. Okay. Yes, I agree. It's not unique to CMMC. 100%. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I mean, the easiest way that I know to put it is the requirements follow the data. Yep. Wherever the data 100%. Goes, the requirements are going to follow. So if you're flowing CUI to a subcontractor and that subcontractor is flowing it to theirs and they're flowing it 15 levels deep, The requirement has to follow all 15 levels. It's the requirements follow the data.
And that was another question that was asked.
DFARS 7012 paragraph M, the last paragraph, subcontracts, is the one that requires you to have those requirements follow the data. Like you said, Scott, that's been there since 2016.
Yep.
And so to your point, just one other note, Scott, you said it exactly head on. I want people to understand this. Prime, sub, and even the subs, if you will, all the way down. And that's where everyone was getting really confused this week, is like, okay, I get that if I have to report my score to my prime, but I have to possess and understand if I'm flowing it down to CMMC required. I know, Scott, you're giving me the look, and it's the same look I gave over the internet. And it was just like, yes, if you send the data, the goal is to protect the data. Anyways, it's Surge Turtle all the way down. Yes, that is a beautiful sentiment, Andy.
Yep, it does flow down. It does absolutely flow down. Alrighty, here's one that's been coming up recently. So the 48 CFR rule is out of regulatory review. It's going to go over and it's going to get published, and then there's going to be an effective date. A lot of times there's a delay in the effective date of what are called major rules, which has a specific meaning according to certain executive orders, that Congress has a period of time to review the rule and potentially overturn or disapprove the rule under their authorities under the Congressional Review Act. So people are often asking now, is Congress going to approve the 48 CFR CMMC rule? Here's the thing. Congress doesn't approve rules. Congress disapproves rules. And so unless they file a joint motion to overturn the rule, all rules go into effect by default. That's the reason that the rulemaking process takes so long, is you're essentially legislating through means other than Congress. They delegate their process to the rulemaking system, and they have for decades. That's a longer story about legal theory. So there is no process by which Congress goes, yep, we approve. There just is this random review period, and then that's kind of it. They automatically go into effect at that point. Now, big picture here, I want people to think, because I know what's going to happen. This rule is going to get published. There's probably going to be a delay in the effective date, which is totally standard. And people are going to go, well, Congress could always disapprove this rule, so we're not going to do anything yet. What is the relationship between 48 CFR CMMC and 32 CFR CMMC? The 48 CFR CMMC rule implements the policy codified at Title 32, the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 170, the CMMC program. It is not changing that policy. It is not establishing new policy. It is not doing any revisions to that policy. It is simply taking that policy and implementing it in contract clause language for you and into the instructions to the contracting officers for when and how to insert that language according to whatever procurements they're doing. So the question would be, if you think that Congress is going to disapprove of CMMC, they would have disapproved the 32 CFR rule from going into effect, because that's the policy. That rule went into effect in December of 2024 after its review period. Remember, it was published in October of 2024, didn't go into effect until 60 days later for this CRA review period, and it went through just fine. Because also remember, Congress is the one that asked for this program, so it wouldn't make any sense for them to overturn it. It wouldn't make any sense for them to overturn the implementing rule of the policy that they just gave the thumbs up to 9 months ago. So they don't need to approve it. It's very unlikely it would get disapproved. Wouldn't make any sense to disapprove it because of the relationship with 32 CFR. So there you go. Tell your friends. All righty. Hey, here's another fun policy question. Is CMMC an unfunded mandate? There is a difference between the term unfunded mandate and saying that there is no funding for CMMC. You are required to do CMMC in the terms of your contract, and there's no funding for it, but that does not mean that it falls under the scope of the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act, the UMRA of 1995, if I recall correctly. And I can prove this to you because on the OMB dashboard for the 32 CFR CMMC final rule, there's all these things that are written about a rule. And this is part of the reason why rulemaking takes so long. They have to review stuff if it's relevant under the Affordable Care Act. They have to review stuff depending on which type of small businesses are affected. Is it part of an unfunded mandates review? No, it's not part of an unfunded mandates review. Is it economically significant, which has specific meaning according to certain executive orders? Is it a major rule, which has specific meaning under certain pieces of legislation? Are there regulatory flexibility analyses that have to be conducted, which are required by certain executive orders? Are there federalism implications, international impacts, pandemic responses? There's all this bureaucracy that has to happen in the preamble to a rule. And if they skip any of these steps and they find out to be applicable, that is grounds for causing a rule to not go into effect. So they're very, very, very careful and methodical about making sure that they go through and check all the boxes so that the legal process of rulemaking doesn't get overturned. But an unfunded mandate has a specific meaning, and neither the 32 CFR CMMC rule that we got last year is an unfunded mandate, nor is this most updated dashboard here for the 48 CFR rule an unfunded mandate. You can find the DoD's explanation of why this is not true in the 32 CFR CMMC proposed rule from 2024. One, it's not under the scope of the language of unfunded mandates, because that primarily has to do with state, local, and tribal government obligations being imposed by the federal government without funding, not you as a business, and certainly not you as a business that are bidding on a contract that has standardized contract terms. And even if it did, the DoD goes on to explain in the proposed rule, there's a national security exemption for unfunded mandates, and this clearly falls in the scope of that. This is one of the things that during the 60-day review process prior to the rule going into effect, Congress would have flagged. They did not, because the analysis is true. It is not an unfunded mandate. However, it is true that there is no funding for CMMC because your bid as a contractor, your overhead rate as a contractor is what is supposed to be funding the work for you to achieve your certification. It's what's supposed to be funding the work for you to implement the requirements pursuant to DFARS 7012 and so on and so forth. So the funding doesn't come externally, just like any DFARS clause doesn't have sources of external funding. That's what the bid represents. Obviously, that gets complicated if you're a subcontractor on the other side of a prime contractor and they limit how big your bid can be, but that's between you and your customer. That is not something that the DoD necessarily has privity of contract on, and that certainly doesn't make that unkind business relationship that maybe you as the small business have with, I don't know, Lockheed Martin or somebody, some big giant mega corporation. That doesn't make CMMC an unfunded mandate. This comes up from time to time in comments and conversations and LinkedIn, so you can go to the dashboard and it'll tell you right there, not an unfunded mandate, everybody.
Yeah, it's part of the contract pricing. Whatever contract pricing you provide to your prime or to the government, that's where it's included.
Yep, there you go. All righty, let's see here. We got a couple more. Let's see. Will they do this? Is it unfunded mandate? All righty. Do Summit 7 offerings satisfy requirements of other agencies like GSA, DHS, cybersecurity requirements, any requirements beyond just DoD and NIST SP 800-171?
Yeah, so we actually had this conversation this week with somebody, and they were like, hey, what else does Summit 7 do in regards to this? And what other governmental overlays, right? So a couple of good pieces of news. So CMMC Level 1, which backs to FAR 52-204-21, right? So that is 17 controls, or they call it the FAR 15, CMMC Level 1, upped and split 2 of the controls to make it 17 instead of 15. So we can cover that. Obviously, CMMC Level 2 or NIST 800-171 Rev 2. We're working on Rev 3. DHS, Department of Transportation, multiple other agencies are already looking to adopt NIST 800-171, either Rev 2 or Rev 3. We are seeing it kind of out in the wild. Livestream last week, I believe, Jacob, somebody said Department of Transportation was requiring NIST 800-171 Rev 3, but they were able to get approval by bringing their CMMC L2 certification, and they took that instead of the need for Rev 3 of NIST 800-171. So that was a completely different agency outside of the DoD. But luckily, NIST 800-171 obviously has its grandfather roots inside of NIST 853, ISO has a lot of the same overlay of requirements on the cyber side of it. So when you start going through, there's definitely a lot of crosswalking that can happen, and support that we can provide kind of in that journey there.
Absolutely. All righty. Let's see here. This is number 3. I'm just going to take an extra second to pull this up because I know I talk about this all the time, but just in case I'm misinterpreting your comment here, Sandra says, oh, that's so sweet. He thinks that Congress will not do the things that make no sense. I don't know if you're talking about what I was talking about, but let's just do a quick history lesson here. Like I said, if you think Congress is going to overturn something that they asked for, then I don't know what to tell you. This is the Senate Armed Services Committee report that accompanied the FY20 NDAA. You can go read it for yourself. And if you just Control F for accountable, you can read the section that they provided on the framework to enhance the cybersecurity of the United States Defense Industrial Base. And they're going to tell you all about how they're concerned that the contractors are an inviting target. They're not complying with their current requirements, and the DoD needs to hold those contractors responsible, especially the prime contractors, for giving DoD's controlled data to contractors and those contractors not implementing those requirements. This is what they asked for. It's why they were very impatient with the fact that rulemaking was taking a while. And then once rulemaking was complete for the CMMC program, they didn't disapprove the rule. So they aren't going to disapprove the 48 CFR rule that finally, years and years later, does the thing that they specifically asked for in defense contracts. We'll give you the link to this Senate Armed Services Committee report, or you can check out our famous history of CMMC video that we recorded all the way back in 2021, where we go into more details about the interplay between what the Senate Armed Services Committee asked for, what the FY20 NDAA says, and then how CMMC eventually took up its final form. Forgot the smiley face. Yeah, totally. No big deal.
So, I would say that, I don't disagree with what Sandra's saying. Congress doesn't necessarily always do everything that we think makes sense anyway, right?
Absolutely.
And we have the Congress and the political environment of 2025 is very, very different than the Congress and the political environment of 2020 when the NDAA was done for FY20, right? That being said, if this exact Congress in this specific administration had not, let 32 CFR go final and go into effect, then I would agree that there would be something there. But it went final in December. New Congress came in place. All kinds of things were put on hold. There was all kinds of conversation about, is this new Congress going to do something to stop, 32 CFR, to stop 48 CFR? And that has not been the case. Yep. So they didn't do anything for 32. It would not make any sense for the same exact individuals on the same exact Congress to do anything to stop 48 CFR.
Yeah, absolutely.
It hasn't, it just hasn't changed that much in the last 5 months.
Yeah, and if anything, like as we know, the situation with non-compliance and with compromises to the data have only gotten worse since they originally asked for it. So, yeah, okay. So we had a couple people fill out questions on the form on CUIHotline.org, so you guys can always go over there and submit those as well. Somebody said, I have a client who utilizes GCC High and wishes to exchange structured CUI files with their customers in the most automated way possible. What is the most compliant and efficient method? SharePoint, SFTP, or another solution? How can we ensure that this approach meets all CMMC requirements for the lifecycle protection of CUI data? What key factors should be considered when comparing different file sharing or other transfer options for secure, compliant collaboration?
Good question. Okay, so we get this a lot, and it's actually less about the platform and more about the process. So there's a tension between collaboration and compliance. We talk about this a lot, especially in research, right? Because people want to just collaborate, and that's fantastic. I love that. However, the element and overlay of compliance is definitely needed. So what I mean by this is SFTPs are great, right? Especially for large file transfers. SharePoint is great for co-authoring documents and working kind of in real time, or just sending a link to the file for someone else to download. But here's the biggest piece of it that people overlook all the time. They enable anonymous guest access with the inability to authorize who's actually pulling the data down or who's sending the data. So one thing that we challenge people on all the time is, hey, there's great technology out there for collaboration. There's cross-cloud collaboration. There's third-party tools that you can integrate if you need to. GCC has a great level of functionality there now. Azure has SFTP capabilities built into blob storage. Like, you can just go on and on and on. The problem is the governance. And entering back into the supply chain conversation, nobody in your organization should be able to provision a guest user for any level of collaboration with CUI unless they have been vetted and approved that they've accepted the DFARS 7012 flowdown, or in future post-CMMC world, the appropriate CMMC level 1 or level 2 self or level 2 certification, so forth and so on. And you possessing evidence that they've actually done that. So platform, there's a lot of really good options out there. Most people focus on the platform. We primarily talk to technical people, completely understand it. But the one thing that you have to double down on and have to reiterate is we can't just allow you to share for the sake of sharing. It has to go through a level of due diligence, or else we could be fined. Like, we could be found at risk of actually spreading CUI to someone it shouldn't go to. So anyway, Scott, any feedback on that? I saw some head nods.
Well, yeah, I mean, we hear from customers, they'll come to us and they'll ask us about doing external sharing. And we have standardized, projects around implementing external sharing and what it takes to do that and do it safely with all the processes and procedures and configurations and everything that goes with that. And then, we'll talk to some, more technical individuals, customers, and they come back after they see our proposal and they're like, why do you want to charge me that to do this project? I can go turn it on in like 5 clicks. And, and the answer is, well, it's not about the 5 clicks. It's about all the process and the governance and, all the things that need to go around it to make sure that you have the right policies in place so that it is happening securely and compliant in a compliant manner. That's where the problem is. That's where the time is. The technical implementation of the solution is really not very difficult if you know what you're doing. It's just not very difficult. It's all the things that go around it to make sure it's being done correctly is the important part.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, here's another form question for you, Daniel. How would you handle this scenario? We have people scattered around the country that work out of their home offices. They travel internationally using travel orders. The customer insists the travel orders are CUI, which is interesting given that you have to show these travel orders to custom officials in certain foreign countries. That means this distributed group of employees need to receive electronically, print, store, carry internationally, and later destroy CUI. What is the best way to handle this? Or maybe what is the least worst way to handle this?
Gosh, okay.
First question I would ask is, are you also dealing with ITAR data? And if the answer is no, that's really good. Because, you can put in place controls to allow, CUI to go, to go internationally. Those controls get a lot more difficult if you also deal with ITAR data.
Yeah, the term CUI does not inherently mean that something is export controlled by any means, right? Export control is one category of controlling unclassified information. So just because something is CUI does not mean that it is export controlled.
Yep.
And that is the tricky part that a lot of people don't understand. Like, you have to be incredibly careful with travel and foreign access or access on foreign soil of that information. Because ITAR, so CUI, process, store, transmit, ITAR goes to the level of access. So again, you have like these both worlds that you have to start mirroring together depending on the type of data. What I'm most confused about is the understanding of that the travel orders are CUI. Because CUI, by the nature of what it is, should not be public information. Like, you should not be able to give it to an unauthorized person, period. Like, just kind of the nature of how the chain of custody, I guess you could say, should work. I'm assuming they're just looking under like general privacy. This is the DoD CUI registry, right? And so it refers to personal information, PII, means of identification, and some examples of it here.
I think there's just still a lot, even, certainly within the DoD, there's still a lot of misunderstanding about what CUI is and how to market appropriately. I mean, we've had these conversations on here before that there are entire publicly available websites that are marked as CUI from the government. which just doesn't make any sense, right? And so there's so much content out there that's being marked as CUI. And on the flip side, there's so much CUI out there that is not being marked as CUI. And so it's just, there's a lot of confusion within the government about how and what, should be marked CUI.
Well, and the other piece of it is like a lot of times when we're talking about PHI and PII and things like that, the scope of it does not impact your personal company's employees. When we're talking about PII and PHI, we're talking about federal employees or people in the military, active or retired, right? And so when you're starting to look at this, it's like there also is a delineation there, right? Like I am not employed. If I'm a contractor to the DoD, I'm not employed by the DoD, right? Like directly. And so I'm a private commercial entity that's now giving away, or not giving away, but serving a contract. So what I would do if I were in your shoes is I would send them this. I would actually look over the authorities and do a quick little read on there. What'll probably highlight that there's a delineation between you have like your information being CUI and a federal employee's person being CUI, and then go back through the process and show CUI I cannot show publicly. I cannot show a foreign customs office CUI or else I'm in violation. So what do you want me to do?
Yeah, this sounds like a case. Somebody put on the DefCert bat signal and get Ryan Bonner on the case. This is exactly the kind of thing that he and his firm love to handle. So if you need some more help, definitely ping them as well. All righty, let's see here. Somebody said, is there a plan to update CMMC to NIST SP 800-171 Rev 3 since Rev 2 is from 2018 and stale? Yeah, there is a plan that will be under the 32 CFR 170 revision. Which will probably popularly be referred to as CMMC 3.0. Because the CMMC program policy says we're assessing 171 Rev 2, you have to go through rulemaking to update that policy to say we are now going to be assessing 171 Rev 3. As far as how stale 171 Rev 2 is, there's a lot of evergreen stuff in there. So MFA is going to be MFA, right? There's a lot of stuff in 172 that is in or 171 Rev 2 that's in 171 Rev 3. A lot of the delta between 171 Rev 3 and 171 Rev 2, in my opinion, is very overstated because the core of what you're doing in 171 Rev 2 is still there. And a lot of the stuff that they added in 171 Rev 3 isn't really a lot of new technical, like whiz-bang cool stuff. It's a lot of assurance, it's a lot of governance, it's a lot of things like that. So yeah, there is a plan to update it, but that doesn't discount the fact that 171 Rev 2 still has legs, still good to go. All righty, let's see here. Somebody left a comment on our podcast from Thursday, Daniel, and they said there are only 69 companies who are authorized to act as CMMC C3PAO testing organizations. I'm gonna stop you right there. There are 79 according to the Cyber AB's marketplace, but let's keep hearing what they have to say. Let's see. DoD level of estimate estimates that each assessment is 200 FTE hours. As a generous estimating average, each C3PAO is able to accomplish 100 assessments per year. 69 organizations time 100 assessments a year is 6,900 assessments annually. If there's 80,000 companies, 69,000 assessments a year equals 11 and a half years before all DIB companies have been tested. There is an XKCD comic for everything. And every time I see somebody say there aren't enough C3PAOs because we only have X number today and we've got 80,000 companies to get through, you are committing an extrapolation error because you are assuming that we will never have any more C3PAOs. You're ignoring how many assessors there are and how many assessors there will be, right? There will be massive demand for assessments. There will be more capacity in the assessment ecosystem. Yeah, there need to be thousands of assessments per year, but it's not like the day that CMMC goes live in phase 1, however many C3PAOs and assessors we have are the only ones that we're going to get. So I get where you're coming from, but that's not how it's going to work because in those estimates that the DoD has, they even say they only expect a couple hundred assessments in the first year. Is that going to be true based off what the mega primes ask their subcontractors to do? We don't know, but the DoD isn't able to estimate that, right? So just try to, over the weekend, while you're enjoying the first Chargers football game of the new NFL season tonight, and you're thinking about how there's only 79 C3PAOs and we got 80,000 companies to get through, how are we going to get through 80,000 companies? Just remember, don't extrapolate incorrectly. Don't be like the guy in the XKCD comic. Alrighty, we are at an hour. The hour always flies by. We get to do an XKCD reference. We do this show every Friday. Scott drops in as often as we can. Scott, we love having you around. Feel free to stop by anytime. Let's see. You can always find this on LinkedIn. You can always find it on YouTube. If you find this after the stream is over, feel free to leave your comments, questions, concerns in the comments, and we'll add them to the queue for next week. You can always go to cuihotline.org, fill out the form, leave a message at the phone number. We're going to be at, Summit 7 Live in Dallas coming up in later this month. We're going to be at Summit 7 Live in Huntsville later this month. We're going to be at National Cyber Summit later this month. We're expecting the 48 CFR final rule to come out later this month. September is jam-packed with stuff. Yeah. But we're going to be here on the Q&A every Friday, like always. And
next week we have Billington Cyber Summit.
That's right.
Be there next week.
Quick, Daniel, please refresh. Make sure we didn't get tagged in any breaking rulemaking news here before I sign off.
I literally was over here checking and trying to ban the little spam bot that's on your little chat here, Jake.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, before the breaking news happens, I'm playing the outro. We'll see you next week.